But yeah, welcome everyone to tonight's Saburomaru virtual tasting part two. Some of you might have attended the first tasting we had with Wakaturu Saburomaru Distillery whiskies earlier this year. So we're thrilled to bring you even more whiskey from this brand. I remember it being one of the most incredible lineups. So I have no doubt that this one will impress as well. We'd hoped to be joined tonight by Raphael, who's the importer of these whiskies into Australia, but he's had to hop a last minute flight to China, so he won't actually be able to make it. If anyone was at our Facial show a few weeks ago, you might have met him on the Anchor whiskey stand. But yeah, unfortunately for tonight, it's just me. I'm going to be relying on all of my manga and video game knowledge, and there will be plenty of mispronunciations, so strap yourselves in for that. But before we get into it, important housekeeping as usual. We recommend having 6 glasses so you can go back and compare each dram if you have the glassware for it. Please don't drive after the tasting event, or, if you're Nick, driving before is okay, but driving after is not recommended. We encourage responsible drinking, even though and I know not all of these are super boozy, but still. All of our tastings are recorded for those who want to watch them back or who can't join us tonight. I know that we had to shuffle things last minute because as every year, apparently we managed to book a tasting on what is it? State of origin, rugby, football, something. I don't know. If it's not cricket, I don't know about it. So we had to move the tasting. So if you can't make it, everything is recorded and will be up on our YouTube page, and Ollie will send out the link afterwards. And we do have an overview of the brand as well in the featured brands page if you wanted to do like a deeper dive into the distillery, but I'll be talking a little bit about it tonight. And please pop tasting notes and questions in the chat. We love seeing them all, and I will try and answer them all. But please beware that my knowledge is limited by the translation accessible on Japanese whiskey websites. There is a lot of poor translations, which is fine. It's kind of hilarious, but I'll do my best to answer any questions. And before we dive into the whiskies, you might have noticed that there's a refreshing highball can that came with your tasting kit. It is a peated whiskey highball refresher, so it'll probably make an excellent palate cleanser at the end of the tasting. If you've already cracked into it and it's too late, I'm sure you thoroughly enjoyed it. Michael's already got his ready and raring to go. I love that. Sadly, I don't have one because I can't have carbonated things anymore, so you will have to describe how delicious it is to me and make me exceptionally jealous. I'm very sad that I can't have highballs anymore, but the whiskey apple juice market is keeping me well fed. But yeah, I think without further ado, we will pop right into whiskey number 1. So this is the Guilty Gear 25th anniversary blend to start off the tasting. A good portion of this tasting is going to be heavily video game focused, so I hope all the gamers here tonight are excited. After reading a little bit about this video game, it's very tempting, but I'm sadly still chugging along on a little dungeon crawler game that I've been playing for the last like 10 years, and I've sunk 5,000 hours into it, so it's too late now. That is the one and only for me. I don't have a lot of room for other video games at the moment. But I believe this is, from what I read, this is kind of similar to one of the Street Fighter type games. There's lots of different characters and stuff like that. Not the style of games that I normally play, but looks super, super cool. Most of the whiskies that we're trying tonight are bottled in celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Guilty Gear video game, which first came out in 1998 on PlayStation, and it was novelized into a manga in 2001. And it's kind of been labeled a cult classic video game ever since it was released, kind of as big as Pokemon and stuff like that, and big as Mario Kart in Japan. It might seem odd that a whiskey brand is related to this video game for the 25th anniversary, but there's actually quite a few references to whiskey in the manga. So when they were celebrating, the video game company, I think it's Arc Studios, reached out to Gyokuto Distillery to bottle some whiskey for the anniversary. So this was part of the first anniversary bottling launch. There was 2 subsequent launches, and each of these 3 whiskies in the first launch featured 2 main characters. So the 25th anniversary blend features both of them. I'm going to absolutely butcher one of these names, and I apologize in advance. Kai Kiske and Soul Badguy. That one I didn't butcher. But yeah, so the labels feature the playable characters from the game, and these are the only 2 characters that appear in every single video game from Guilty Gear, including all the spin-offs and the manga. So I think that's why they decided to launch with these. Michael, you are correct. This release set was only available in limited amounts. People could access it via a ballot on like the 14th of December, but only through the video game website. So they could go into a ballot for a week, and then the bottles would be launched on like, I think, the 21st of December. So yeah, so a week, and then people could order, and it pretty much sold out right away. It was, yeah, went absolutely crazy, which is good to see. I love the, it's that thing of video games and whiskey nerds tend to cross over a lot more than people anticipate, I think. But yeah, so super, super cool. This is a blended whiskey, so it's got malt and grain components to it. It features single malt from Saburomaru, and then what the Japanese websites referred to as bourbon style grain whiskey from Scotland. So I think we can probably assume that the grain component is corn based. The malt component of this, when I smelt it, didn't appear to come off as super peated, which is kind of why I set it off as the starting whiskey in the lineup. And they definitely get more gangbuster on the peat as we go on. And the tasting notes that the websites I found for this were all like, oh, soft orchard fruits and apples, and I'm like, doesn't sound very peated to me. So let's start and ease our way in with this one. So super curious about it. Artholism. I think there's that, Rob, there's that perfect point when you're like gaming or you're doing some kind of hobby like that, where it's like a certain amount of drinks and you become a pro. And then as soon as you tick over that, it's all downhill. Please pop tasting notes in the chat. I would absolutely love for them. Rob, you on a Friday night? Definitely spent plenty of Friday night gaming like that. Oh, it's referred to as the Bolmer curve. Don't even want to know how it got that name, Michael. Gotcha. Ex-Microsoft CEO. That sounds slightly less dodgy then. Michael says, sweet, definitely get a wet cardboard at the back of the palette. Yeah, I kind of get that a little bit too. It's that kind of like, when you get flowers and they start to wilt a bit and they've got that kind of sad smell to them. It's, that kind of a little bit astringent, but it's not offensive, if that makes sense. Please feel free to tell me if I'm crazy in the chat. We're only on whiskey number 1, which is the 25th anniversary blend. Brendan says, light peat on note, not so much on palate, lightly oaked. Yeah, for me, I get the peat more on the palate, but it's kind of like it's gonna sound so weird. It's kind of like sandpaper. It like tickles across your tongue as like sandpaper as it goes through. It's, yeah, super interesting. Michael says it's very little peat for me. Yeah. Fairest Wisp. Rob, I have apparently got a bunch of gamers and whiskey nerds. Can any of us ever get flowers? Hey, you should treat yourself, okay? You deserve flowers, as Miley Cyrus says. You can buy yourself flowers. So, but yeah, no. It's it's definitely got those like floral aromas that you get from a whiskey, like those white jasmine flowers and stuff. Michael, it's not a marine peat either, it's more Highland. Yeah, definitely. So I believe that a lot of the peat that they source is either from the Highlands of Scotland or from Japan. I believe they've got some peat nearby that they source as well. So it's definitely not going to be your medicinal Punchy Isla peat whatsoever. And I believe that the next whiskey that we move into is going to be more aligned to the style whiskey that's in the highball as well. But yeah, it's definitely not a rambunctious kind of peat. Michael really dislikes the finish on it. Fair enough. I kind of get what you mean. It definitely goes into that earthy, dirty, well, not dirty, but yeah. Ian finds the peat comes in more at the very end. Fair enough. I think that's fascinating that the peat is coming in at different points for different people. I'd be curious to see how that compares to what kind of peated whiskey you like, because I don't like Lefroy, so I find it this peat in the middle, and I'm wondering if like Lefroy lovers will find it at the end or at the start, or curious. Yeah. Well, it's gotten us started off. I think potentially the two single malts that were released in this batch are going to be a little bit more interesting. I know you've probably all seen the absolutely dark sherry cask one, which I'm super excited about at the very end. But yeah, so very interesting to compare it to the second whiskey that I've put on the list for tonight, which is I'm absolutely gonna butcher this one, Gyokuto blend 2023 edition. So very identical kind of format. So Saburomaru single malt and then a Scottish grain component. This is one of the two non-video game whiskies tonight. But this is an annual release that they do. So the single grains or the grain components come from across a couple of grain distilleries in Scotland. So they don't really tell us which ones. But I'm curious to see how this compares to the previous one, because yeah, like I said, in theory, they are very similar, very identical in their format. But I believe the first Saburomaru tasting we tried the 2022 blend. So if anyone remembers that, it was only how many months ago now? Like 6 months ago. Time has flown. But does it have some PX cask on top of wine cask? I'm really not certain about the casking on this. There really isn't a lot of information about this either from the distillery or from any of the Japanese blog websites either. So again, the single malt portion from Saburomaru is peated in this. So they do a 50 ppm malt that they produce, but nowhere it says the ratios or anything like that between the malt and grain components. So like not really certain on that, not certain on the casking. I presume that they use a lot of ex-bourbon refill, probably some wine cask. Rob, in terms of available for purchase, I'm not certain which ones are available for purchase. Some of them might be, but the Guilty Gear ones specifically, we only have one maybe 2 sets of the 4, and they have to unfortunately be sold as the set of 4. But I will share the list of the whiskies that are available up on the website. Obviously, as usual with our tastings, 10% off is what we've popped on for all the Saburomaru whiskies for tonight for you guys. But yes, like I said, it's whatever's in that collection, that list. I'm not 100% certain. I do believe the Far East of Pete is still there from the last one. And yes, as Rob says, it's the duck's nuts. It is absolutely phenomenal if you don't recall it from the last one. And let's just say I've been thinking long and hard about getting a bottle for myself as well. So yeah, I believe the ones that we have that were also in the last tasting as well are available. I know that we had to get more Far East of Pete, which is excellent. But yeah. Let me see if I can find the... Nope, I cannot find the photo for the regular blend. But yeah, it seems everyone's much more keen on the second one, on the regular annual release so far. Seeing a few nods. It almost smells sweeter, but like in a... Yeah, I see why you asked about the PX sherry cask now. It has that like almost sherried vibe to it. Hmm. Mm. That is a lot more peat than the last one. Particularly hits you on the palate, but I'm on everyone's side. I completely agree. The second one seems to be really, really good. Lovely mild peat background, says Michael. Yeah, this actually is a little bit reminiscent of what I liked about the Far East of Peat as well. That like kind of sweet smoke. Really nice. For anyone wondering as well, I think when Ollie put this up on the website, he put it as a Guilty Gear bottle. It is not a Guilty Gear bottle. It is just another one with a Japanese word on it. And the word Gyokuto, which is what they use for all of these annual blend releases, comes from a mythological Japanese creature, which is apparently a white rabbit that lives in the moon, which is really sweet. I mean, English people see faces in the moon, and Japanese people see rabbits, and I think their perspective on the moon is a lot cuter than ours. But yeah, no. Ian likes this one as well. Does anyone have any questions so far as well about that? Hopefully I can answer about the blends and the components and everything. Yeah, that's really good. But yeah, so Wakatsuru Saburomaru Distillery, this is the two names mushed together. They release this one specifically in an annual release for most markets around the world, and then they have like certain sub styles. So I think last time we tried the Junin Mayo, which was one of their Japan only, I think, releases. And then they have like single malts that only go to specific markets, and then they've got blended whiskies that only go to specific markets. So they're pumping out a lot of whiskey, which is actually pretty surprising. Yeah, not mad at it, but they are producing quite a lot of whiskey and bringing in quite a lot of Scottish grain whiskey for their blends as well, which is really interesting. They source all their grain from Scotland because the few grain distilleries in Japan are either owned by Suntory or Nika. So obviously that whiskey is not going to be accessible or available for other distilleries. And so they decided to source Scottish grain, which I think works better. No offense to Cheetah and and Takasuru, but yeah, no, I think this works a lot better. Alrighty. Shall we move on to and return to the video game whiskies? I'm excited about this one. So, unfortunately, again, from the Japanese blog websites and from the distillery site itself, there is not a lot of information about this whiskey, other than the fact that it has been fully matured in an ex-bourbon cask for 4 years. So it is single malt. All of the malt whiskey comes from Saburomaru, and this is kind of a good time to start talking about the distillery itself. Yeah, Brendan, I wish I could get more cask info. There's not a lot of information that comes out of Japan, and even if there is some, like, it's really tricky. Like, I saw some websites where they're like, yes, they released this sake, and I'm like, it's a whiskey, but they're like, sake and spirits and whiskey is all kind of the same thing depending on your translation and interpretation of the kanji, which is kind of annoying. So yeah, there's not too much information, and unfortunately Raf is not here to answer, but at the very least this one we know is fully matured in ex-bourbon, thankfully. But yeah, so this was part of that initial first release as well, along with the sherry butt one. They're both heavily peated single malts. The distillery produces a 50 ppm malt, but the stills are particularly unique, which is why the peat doesn't taste the same as what we would typically think. So the distillery itself was operating as a sake brewery since 1862 under 5 generations of the Inagaki family. They started producing a whiskey from the 1960s up until 2015, but the area of the brewery that was used for producing whiskey wasn't really well maintained. Like, it didn't get an update at all during that time, and it was kind of more of a passion project rather than an actual commercial venture for the business. And it wasn't until Takehiko Inagaki, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, tasted some of the early single malt that his grandfather had made, that he decided that we should be making whiskey again. Like, we need to get back into this, but let's like do it properly. So he ended up crowdfunding to help kind of repair and replace the part of the whiskey producing side of the business and the building. And the distilling equipment was so old, so outdated, and so broken, and it had to be completely replaced. And he was not prepared to wait for the 2 years that it would take to get a Scottish still from, I think he was looking at the Forsyth stills, which are a very big still producer in Scotland. So what he did was he found a local bell maker who specialized in casting copper for bells. So it's all one piece of metal that is metal alloy that is melted and cast into a specific shape, rather than hammered pieces of copper that are then riveted together, which actually gives them the benefit of no like heat dips or weak spots necessarily, or a reduced amount. So I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with metallurgy, but you know, the more dense, the more dings, and the more shape changes in the metal, it can affect heat dispersion across the metal. And so it's actually a really, really unique point of difference for this still. Let me see if I can share the photo. There we are. So this is kind of how the still itself was created. So it was molded, the individual parts were molded, poured, and set. And then those individual parts are then kind of riveted together. So there are some portions, but what it means as well is that these portions of the still are interchangeable. So like the base of the still, the neck of the still, the line arm, they are all, you can swap them out, interchange them, which makes repairing and replacing them super easy. Repairing them, I assume they'd probably just melt them back down and recast them. But super, super unique. They had to go through a couple of different alloys to figure out what exactly would work for the still, because obviously you want a sufficient enough amount of copper that it casts, but you can't have 100% copper because then I believe it doesn't melt quite right. It's very tricky. Something that people who are much smarter than me know how to sort, but yeah, super interesting. I should probably get into this whiskey because I have not even poured it into my glass yet. And I'm super excited. There's a lot more peat apparently, says Michael. So curious. Oh, very earthy, campfire well integrated, on par with the Far East of peat. Mate, you are setting high standards for this already. I'll share the photo of this release as well. The bottle. Ooh. This is what happens when Ollie leaves me to my own devices. Takes me forever. So yeah, so this is the bottling with the character on it. There is actually a full game wiki dedicated to this video game as well, so you can read the entire backstory of each character, what they do, their history, and everything. It's pretty cool. It's very fun. So yeah. Oh wow. Wowie. Yeah, red, lovely pea. Does anyone else get Ardbeg vibes from this? That kind of like really bright, grassy top note? Yeah, Michael, you and I are on the same wavelength. And it's got all those like bright characteristics that I associate with Ardbeg. That's fantastic. It's a little lighter. Yeah, no, I agree, Rob. It's definitely like a little lighter. I think with this one, you feel the full force of the 50 ppm though that they use. Iguodala WBC. Has anyone tried the new Ardbeg Spectacular? No, I'm getting a lot of no's. Okay, this is kind of similar to that. It is quite good actually. I quite like the new Ardbeg, but I'm not a massive Ardbeg fan. So people who like Ardbeg will probably maybe not like it. Who knows? It's like me trying to give advice on a good Laphroaig. I'm like, I'm not the person to ask for that because I don't like it. I can try, but you know, grain of salt and all that. But yeah, definitely in the Ardbeg vibe. Definitely that younger kind of tickling, like if you mixed Wee Beastie and the 10-year-old together, kind of vibes. Ian Allison's asking anyone else get lime on this one. Yeah, I could see like a bit of lime peel, like a almost candied lime peel. Michael has a tingly, salty finish on the tongue. Definitely. I think the peat stays more in your mouth with this one. It's definitely one of those you breathe out and you're like, all that smoke. Well, I think after the hurdle of the first one, things are going okay with the rest of the lineup so far. It's very curious that like the two single malts were released alongside the blended, and you would kind of almost hope that the blended was a mix of the two single malt styles. I think that would have been really cool, but and then with a grain portion in it, but yeah, super yum. Only 500 bottles were produced. Oh, okay. Jeez, Michael, you should be running this tasting. Yeah, so it was definitely limited, and there was only like a certain number of sets. There were, like I said before as well, there were 3 releases that were done. So this first set was released in December of 2023, and then that kind of actually follows into the next whiskey really well. The next whiskey is the Dizzy blended. So again, another character. But that was then launched later as a second part. So this one was launched in late January of 2024. And then this one, we do kind of know the proportions. From what everything has said, it's a 50% single malt from Scotland and 50% single malt from Saburomaru. Sorry, hiccups. Yeah, so it is 50-50, equal parts. Obviously, the Saburomaru is peated. Uncertain about the peat level on the Scottish single malt. But yeah, it definitely smelled like a little bit more gangbusters when I first nosed it than the previous one. So I'm curious to see how this kind of flows in for everybody as well. I should pour it before I forget, and then I'll have talked for like 10 minutes and then finally get to taste it after you've tasted everything. Always the way. Ooh, new fave. Ooh, alrighty. Yeah, because it's a higher ABV, I kind of wanted to place it later than the other blends, but you know, I wasn't sure how the 4-year-old Saburomaru Kyo Badguy would go. But yeah, definitely be interesting to compare this one versus the blends that have the grain portion in them. But yeah, so like I said, second batch release. There was apparently a third batch release dropped in February featuring another character from the video game. So this character, Dizzy, is also from the video game, but I couldn't find out any information on the February release. And the blogs that I went to were talking about sake, and so again, I assumed that either they did bottle another whiskey and then they just used the word sake because they use it interchangeably sometimes with the translations, or it might be that they actually did do a sake release because the distillery also produces sake and shochu. It is a very traditional distillery. So let me see if I can find the photo of this one. Yeah, it is a sake. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Alrighty, so this is the bottle image as well for it. Classically lightly clothed women for this release. But yeah, this character is also quite big in the video game series, so they were like, yep, she can have her own bottling as well. So there we go. Extra slow tonight because I've got like 6 tabs, lots of images pulled up. But yeah, so I'm curious to see as well what we think the Scottish single malt is as well. Ian says it's his favorite label. Of course it is. Michael's something in the background of this grassy, maybe. Thank you everyone in the chat for sharing the sake links and whatnot. Yeah, when I was looking it up, it was just like, yeah, it's just a sake. And I'm like, tell me more. Tell me the character name so I can Google it, and then it'll take me to the wiki. Brandon, a little salty, a little meaty, Talisgrass, maybe. Yeah, I'm curious to see with like maybe a show of hands for whoever's got their video on, if you think the Scottish malt is peated or unpeated. So who's erring on the idea that it might be peated as well? No? Does anyone who thinks that the Scottish portion is unpeated? Yeah, 2 of the Michaels and the Rob. Yeah, okay. then Ian and Nick vote for peated as well. Yeah. Michael, lovely mouthfeel, beautiful and fruity Highland grass notes for me. I'm sure there's no other rub, but the rub. I've already done the Michaels. I get Manickmore notes off this. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Manickmore, but it's that like almost juicy in the way that a Dalyuan is, but it's very, very grassy. And it's not a super common single malt to find, even in independent bottlings. It mostly just goes into Diageo blends, but I think there is a Manickmore Flora and Fauna release. But yeah, it's definitely like super grassy. I mean, maybe you could say it was like a Glenelgan as well. Ian's getting telescoping. Understands? Yeah. For me, I personally, well, I mean, modern Talisker has changed completely. Modern Talisker is much more orangey, I find, for me personally. It used to be like seaweed and caramel Werthers, which I love, which is why I had to stock up on it before they changed to the new bottlings. But yeah, no, really curious. Mm. Does anyone have any other distillery guesses? Mm. I can see Rob thinking hard about it. No. Michael, it reminds you of Bladnoch. Yeah, fair enough. I will say, like old Bladnoch, exceptional. Oh, disgustingly good. So, so good. I'm not quite there with the younger Bladnoch at the moment though. But my bank account does not afford me old Bladnoch, so I have to put up with it. But yeah, no. Yeah, it's definitely that softer, floraler. Ollie's left. Ollie can't see. You should email him to pay me more so I can afford old Bladnoch. And then I'll crack bottles with everyone and share it. But yeah, no, it's definitely that like I'm getting a lot of like juiciness and whatnot. Michael loves a peat note, not too astringent. Yeah, it's not nowhere near as like ashy campfire as the last one, which is super interesting to kind of see and how it plays off. Another one. Michael prefers this one. Yeah, I think because I'm not an Ardbeg fan, I prefer this one as well. But that's just me. But yeah. Now, this next one, speaking of Isla whiskies as well again, Ian, you've said that this one's your favorite so far for every single one that's come out. You're pulling one of those. This is our best ever. No, this one's our best ever on us. Yeah, anyway. Whiskey number 5. So this one is super interesting. Speaking of how the other one kind of tasted very much like Ardbeg, this one is really unique. It was so the Empress is part of the tarot card series, the major arcana. I'm not very woo-woo, so I'm not super up on tarot and the intricacies and the differences and the order of them. But this was the first bottling in the series that uses peat sourced from Islay. So this is not Highland peat. This is not local Japanese peat. This peat came from Islay, whether that's from the Port Ellen malting houses or from the guys at Kilhoman or one of the other places that does their own peat from Islay. Not sure, but this is going to be a very different peat profile. So super curious to get this in my glass and start sniffing it. But yeah, so this is part of the Taro Saburomaru whiskey series. So last tasting we had edition number 2, which was the High Priestess. I think there might be 1 or 2 bottles left, unless they sold like the other week. But yeah, so when they released this one, the first release, technically, or release 0, was the Fool. Then the release number 1 was the Magician. We had the High Priestess as release number 2, and now we're on the Empress, and I think the next one is the Emperor. And then it's a similarly annual release, it looks like. This was distilled in 2020 and bottled in 2023. Alongside the Isla Peat, they also used wooden washbacks for this one as well. So like super, super old school style, old school Scottish style whiskey production. With this one, there's not a lot. There's a few wooden washbacks in Scotland, but yeah, you're obviously getting a different fermentation versus using stainless steel washbacks. The distillery actually released 2 versions of this whiskey, one at cask strength and one at 48%. And I'm sure you're all about to look at your sample labels now. It's not the cask strength one. I can tell you that right now, which is slightly disappointing, but that's okay. So they only produced 12,000 bottles of this, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually very limited globally. So again, we have to thank Raphael for helping us get our hands on this release. Brendan, I don't take the plastic out of the bottle because I only have small amounts. I like to joke I'm a mass spectrometer at work. I don't drink a lot in case I need to drive for anything for any reason afterwards. You don't have to leave the plastic on the sample bottles. It's just leak proofing them. That is all it is. But I can also tell you that it's really easy to remove them with like, if anyone's got like we call them bar blades, but the flat bottle openers. If you just get it under the lip, or even like a spoon in the way that you would open one of those like little Milo tins or whatever, that will probably not damage your fingernails. Is probably the safest bet, but yeah. Rob's happy to lick the insides of the glass. Fair enough. I always drip it out, and then the thing is as well is that, you know, some regulars live in my area, and often I get messages being like, is there any of this left? Did you have a sample of this? Did you try this? And I'm like, just take whatever's left of mine. I'm not a massive drinker at home, so I have a pile of about 200 sample bottles from tastings from the last 3 years sitting around my house, and some I won't part with because they're really special and I never got a bottle, and I'm just going to sit on that sample for way too long. But yeah, so now I only have a little bit out of each of them. Oh, Ollie has returned. That's a good idea. Ollie should we should release a whiskey tasting knife to get the little leak-proof plastic caps off the off the bottle. Make it branded TWL. Perfect. Get right on it. Is anyone else getting that it's a lot more subdued on the nose than the others in terms of the peat? It's definitely got a more of a roast vegetable thing to it, I think. Michael finds it the opposite. Tobacco, barbecue peat, nose, palate, and finish is subdued. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a lot softer. And it makes me wonder if that's from the still specifically that they use. I mean, that would be like, obviously location wise doesn't help with the differences in distillation, but it'd be really curious to kind of see how an Isla peat behaves in a cast still in Scotland. But that would be a lot of money to figure it out, so no one's probably going to invest in that. But yeah, Ian, this is now Ian's favorite. until the next one comes. Mm. I feel like there's not as many commandeering flavor notes kind of jumping out at me. Is anyone else getting that it's like very chill? I feel like I'm having to work really hard to figure out the flavors. What's the cask? The ex-bourbon cask, I believe. I believe it's a refill. Let me see. Unfortunately, as with all the others, the label doesn't really give much of an indication. But yeah, heavily Isla peated. I assume it is refill ex-bourbon casks with this one. So, Michael S reckons it's sessionable. Yeah, pay that. It's not the term I've derived is thinker's dram. You know, it's a thinker's dram where you just want to like write an essay on it. You want to like dissect it in every little bit. This is not a thinker's dram. This is one of those whiskeys where it's just like, I'm peated and I'm tasty. Take it or leave it. Yeah, Rob wouldn't say heavily peated. Yeah, I wonder if they did peat it to 50 ppm, same as their other standard, or if they couldn't get the same ppm. And the question is as well, did they like send any Japanese barley over there to then get it peated, or was it all Scottish barley sent over to Japan? Like, it's again not super clear on it, but yeah. Yeah, the peat doesn't smack you. It's a gentle and subtle flavor, says Simon. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ian doesn't taste heavily peated at all. Yeah, it's I don't want to say watery because it definitely does have still quite a bit of body to the whiskey, but it's definitely thin on the peat. Yeah. Alrighty. Now let's move on to the last and final one then. I think this one won't be quite as subtle. I think even from the nose alone, this one is going to be, I think it's going to be Ian's new favorite. I really believe it. But yeah, no, I'm super, super curious about this one. So this label, let me see if I can pull up the photo for you. Just go through my bajillion photos of these whiskeys. So this is the label for the character Soul Badguy. It might surprise you to learn that Soul Badguy is not, in fact, the bad guy. He's actually the main protagonist of the video game series. And I cannot get over how much I love like Japanese names when they like convert things to English. It makes me so happy. But yeah, so Ollie coming out with the obvious that it's significantly darker compared to the rest. This is Michael's favorite. Suck it, Ian. But yeah, so the reason that they kind of like paired this one with the Kai Kisame one is that they are rivals in the games and in the manga. So I think apparently Kai is the bad guy. I don't know. Am I going to play the game and find out? Probably not. So yeah, this bottling is super unusual and probably one of the first like really gangbuster fully matured sherry cask releases, both from Saburomaru Distillery and I think probably outside of Akeshi. I haven't seen anything quite as heavily sherried from Japan in this kind of vein, this kind of style. Ian wanted to prove me wrong, but yes, haha, I was right. So I wasn't able to source exactly what type of sherry cask it comes from, But given the color, the 4-year-old age statement, and the aroma, I'm probably leaning towards a PX cask or an Oloroso cask, one of the two that was a first fill, I want to say. I mean, this is dark, but it's from a Badguy butt. Solid, Rob. But yeah, so I'm fascinated to see what you think. Again, this is their single malt peated to 50 ppm. This is not Isla peat like the previous one. This is again going back to that like Highlander Japanese peat style. Oh, it is so dark. I'm so excited. Michael says it feels like it should have more viscosity on the tongue. Okay. Sweet tobacco reminds me of something. Yeah, it's got that like old leather bags or like leather polish when you're trying to revive like an old leather item, and it's just like it just seeps into the cracks. And yeah, big chops on the finish. And almost like a Chinese 5-spice. Like I don't cook with a lot of Chinese 5-spice, but it's that like, yeah, that clove and something else kind of aroma. Wow. It reminds me of, I think it was a Blair Athol we had recently. Maybe a Thompson Brothers or something like that. That was like equally as just tannic, leathery, dry. Yeah, Michael, very dry, sucked the life out of my cheeks. Yeah, it's just definitely a kind of whiskey. You're just trying to get the moisture back into your face. I will say, look, heavily peated and in a sherry cask is my favorite flavor combo personally. And it's really exciting and unusual to see it done in Japan. I think the only other one I could think of would be the Nika peated Miyagi Kyo, but even then their sherry maturation is not to the same extent of what's happened to this one. This is cool. I think it's that thing of like you get that that rancio, that tannin, like everyone was saying. But yeah, just also this like leathery kind of and like burnt raspberry kind of thing as well. Yeah, super cool. Michael's questioning whether it's heavily peated. Yeah, I think it's just that thing of the way that sherry casks behave with peated whiskey. It takes all that smoke and it's just like bacon, and so your brain gets confused and it thinks of meat rather than of peat and smoke in the same way. Ian says sweet tobacco, spicy on the tongue and lips. I love that. Dry sandpaper and old leather bags. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Well, now Ian cannot lie to us anymore. I will start the poll and we will see what the favorite actually is. So I believe Ollie has set it up as per usual so that you can pick your top 2 favorite ones. But yeah, in terms of the lineup, it'll be really interesting to see as well if there will be more anime, manga, or video game collaborations in the future coming out of Japan and Japanese whiskey distilleries. As I was researching them, one of the blogs had some articles about talking about the Mickey Mouse Chichibu and the Winnie the Pooh Chichibu 2024 releases that have been launched. And obviously it's the Steamboat Mickey or Steamboat Willie, whatever character, which is now part of the public domain that Disney tried to get pulled out of the public domain and they tried to extend it. And then obviously Winnie the Pooh as well has become part of the public domain. I think someone's trying to put a horror movie out with Winnie the Pooh because of that. But yeah, we'll see what eldritch horrors await us with cartoon and whiskey collaborations. Rob says it's been done. They've already released. Is this the movie? Yeah. Blood and Honey, there's a sequel. I'm like, oh dear. I'm not a horror movie fan. I will not be watching that, but I'll be interested to see how much the crossover makes it. I personally will look forward to if Angus at Whiskey Sponge will take advantage of these now public domain characters. I fully anticipate and hope that he will. But yeah, I will share again as well the 10% off all the Saburomaru whiskies that we have on the website before I finish up the poll. Like I said before, and then Ollie can kind of back up with the details. Not all of these whiskies are available, but we do have some of the previous ones as well, like the Far East of Pete. And there will be a ballot for the Guilty Gear bottles, which include the last one that we just tried. Ollie, did you have more information on that one?
Yes, so there's 2 sets in the country, so a total of 2 bottles of each of the 4 Guilty Gear series. As attendees of the tasting, you get first dibs. So just email chris@thewhiskylist.com.au if you're interested in it. Obviously, if more than 2 people are asking for it, we'll just throw your names into a ballot and get the computer to generate a number, and hopefully you win. If only 2 of you go for it, then lucky you 2 and you get it. Chris told me the RRP for the set's $1,000, but we'll do 10% off as well for them. So you'll get them for 900 plus free shipping and all that sort of stuff. So ignore my fire. You comment. I have no idea what that's going on about, but sure, consider it ignored.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we wish we've asked them to send some more, so we could obviously do single bottles, but yeah, that's just super rare. These kind of anime collector series bottles, so I'm trying to sell them as a set first.
Yeah, we'll see how they go. But yeah, and on that note, I will end the poll. Everyone put their votes in, and I'm not really surprised that the sherry butt is the pick of the night. It was great to see the Dizzy and the Kiske bottles get up there as well. Obviously, no love for the 25th anniversary blend, but I don't think any of us are probably surprised by that. It wasn't bad, but I just think, especially when you compare it to all the other whiskeys tonight, it just gets completely blown out of the water. So yeah, no. Rob highly recommends the Far East of Pete as well. You don't lead with your strongest. Yeah, that's fair. Yes, if you were at the last tasting and tried the Far East of Pete, I think that was probably the pick from the last tasting. Highly recommend it as well. But otherwise, that is it for tonight. We've come to the end of the tasting. Thank you everyone so much for joining me as I traverse this Japanese whiskey journey solo. And all the research that I had to put together while my cat was actively stopping me by sitting on my arms. But yeah, we don't often get to do these limited Japanese whiskey virtual tastings though, so any chance we get to, we absolutely love to share more Japanese whiskey in Australia, particularly affordable Japanese whiskey. Obviously the limited ones maybe not, but Far East of Pete and the others are fantastic. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. As much as I would love to stick around and keep chatting longer, I have a flight to catch to Perth tomorrow. So hopefully I will see some of you at the Perth show on Saturday. I'll be in the shop as usual, so come say hi. And yeah, have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your refreshing highballs if you haven't already finished them. And I will see you at the next tasting. Take care, everyone.